All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Elul. To thank Jerry and Sora Wolasky for dedicating all of the Shurim and Drushos this month. In the refuah sheleimah for Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira. To thank the Tilson and Wohl families of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in honor of the marriage of our children and in the zechus of a Shana Tova for all. To thank Shaindy and Avraham Kelman from Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory of their beloved parents and in the zechus of all of those who need a refuah sheleimah. To thank Selma Woolf for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month with immense gratitude to Hashem and with Teffilos for health for all in the new year. And with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Chav Dalit 24. We are actually picking up on Chav Gimel Amud Beis. We have a lot to do today, so we are picking up on 24b. And let's just go back 16 lines up from the bottom. We actually got a little bit further in yesterday's example. Let's begin from here. So the Gemara says, so remember again, we're focusing now on the last line of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah explained that, remember we had a lot yesterday. Yesterday was a packed day. Right? We saw the positions of the Chachamim, of Rabbi Meir, and ultimately of Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Now the Mishnah ended off by telling us that everyone agrees an Eved Kanani, all right, a non-Jewish servant could be emancipated through kasef, through money. There's a machlokes, exactly the mechanics of that, but the Mishnah ended off with the phrase, ubilvad, as long as the kasef, the money, belongs to someone else. Okay, it belongs to someone else. So we're trying to figure out what's the meaning of that statement. So Amar Rabba Rav Sheshas. So Rav Sheshas says as follows. Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Sheshas. The Kuli Alma, everyone agrees. Ein kinyan la'eved below Rabba. So both say this is important. Everyone agrees. An Eved can't acquire anything independently of his master. Similarly, again, a wife can't acquire anything independently of her husband. I will say, although the Gemara is lumping those two concepts together, they are, of course, worlds apart. Right? The concept that an Eved cannot acquire something independent of the master is because the Eved is owned by the master. The reason why a woman cannot acquire something independent of her husband is not because she's owned, chas v'shalom. It is because, again, remember, since a husband is obligated to go ahead and support his wife, Chazal awarded him, her maaseh adayim, her earnings and her findings. So to speak, whatever she acquires, he acquires. So what's the case here? I will say, so I'll say, here's the case, right? I know that my friend Ruvain has an Eved Kanani. But Eved Kanani is a nice guy. I'd like to arrange for his emancipation. So what do? I give him money. 1 second. You give him money, anything you give to an Eved automatically becomes the property of who? Of who? Of the master. So how could I give the Eved emancipation money? So the case is where I say to the Eved, I'm giving you this money, Albanas, on the condition that your master doesn't have any rights in this money. See, here's the shayla. What's the impact? Rabbi Meir Savar, Kiyamar Leikani, Kani Eved. Rabbi Meir says, here's what happens. As soon as I tell the Eved to acquire the money, the Eved acquires it. And once the Eved acquires it, for Kani Rabbe, the master acquires it. V'chi Amar Le Almanas, and when I tell the Eved Almanas on the condition, so what is Lo Klum Ka Amar Le? Ultimately, again, such a statement is fundamentally meaningless. Rabbi Meir says, you cannot go ahead and give something to an Eved on the condition that his master doesn't acquire it. It doesn't work that way. Whatever an Eved acquires, by definition the master acquires, so therefore such a statement according to Rabbi Meir will be meaningless. So that's why Rabbi Meir will say, the only way to go ahead and affect emancipation through money for an Eved Kanani is how? For a third party to give money to the master. But the moment you give the money to the Eved, even if you say with the condition that the master doesn't have any hold on it, it's done. The master acquires it, and emancipation can't happen. Next, for Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan say, even though only Amanas, Ahani Leitran. The Rabbanan say, no, the condition works. Even though normally we will all agree that whatever an Eved acquires, the master acquires as well. If you give the money with the condition, with the Tanai will actually work. Okay, Rabbi Lazar says, Kol ki hai gavna de koli amalo pligi the Kani Eved Kani Rabbi. And Rabbi Lazar seems to side with Rabbi Meir, and he will say that ultimately, again, everyone agrees in this kind of case, whatever the master acquires ultimately, or whatever the servant acquires, the master acquires. What's the case here? According to Rabbi Lazar, right? The case over here is where I'm giving the Eved Kinani a mana, and I say, this is the money on the condition that you go free. Now, both say, do you hear the difference between two formulations? Originally, the Gemara wanted to suggest that the formulation was, I'm giving the Eved Kinani money, al-minas, on the condition that your master doesn't have any hold in it. Al-minas, what was the lashon? Al-minas she'in rab l'rab chorushus bo. I'm giving you this money on the condition that your master does not have any rishus, right? Any ownership over it. Now the Gemara is suggesting that's not the case. The case is where I say to the Eved, this is the money, right? This is the money on the condition that you go out with it to freedom. Now what's the difference? What's incredible? Rabbi Meir Savar, Kani Eved, the Kani Rabbi, the Amrle Amanas, Lo Klum Kamer. So we'll say Rabbi Meir is consistent, right? Rabbi Meir says, listen, Ein Kinyan Eved below Rabbo. A servant cannot acquire anything without his master. The moment you put something into that Eved's hand, what's happening? Master acquires it, and there's no emancipation process. Okay? And the almanas, the fact that you're attaching a condition, is absolutely meaningless. Rabbanan Sarbo says this is incredible. Rabbanan Savri, Lidide Nami Halo Kamakni Le, Daha Amar Le, Daha Lo Amar Le Ella, Almanas Shetetze Bolacherus. Rabbi said, this is fascinating. On the other hand, the Rabbanan say like this. When I give the Eved Kinani money, and I say to him, this is money, Almanas Shetetze Bolacherus, on the condition that you go out, that you're emancipated with this money. So Rabbi said, the Rabbanan, you know what the mechanics of that are? I'm not conveying ownership of that to the Eved. I'm not giving it to the Eved. What am I doing? I'm giving it to the Eved so that he should give it to the master. But at no point in time do I want the Eved to acquire that money. You say, isn't that fascinating? So because the Eved's never acquiring the money, therefore if the Eved never acquires it, what? The master never acquires it. If the master never acquires it, essentially the Eved becomes the courier, right? My courier to be able to go ahead and deliver that emancipation money to the master. So it's such a fascinating idea. So this is the machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. When I go ahead and I go over to the Eved Kinani, I say, here's the money, al-minas, on the condition that you go out with this money to freedom. Rabbi Meir says, cut it out. When you give that money to the Eved, anything an Eved acquires, the master acquires, and that's it. You said al-minas is meaningless. Rabbanan say, no. In this type of formulation, what I'm literally saying is, I don't want the Eved to acquire it. Right? I want the Eved simply to be the courier of my money to the master. The Eved never acquires it. If the Eved never acquires it, the master doesn't acquire it. And therefore, when the Eved brings the money to the master and the master accepts it, the Eved goes free. Incredible. So the Gemara says, V'rami, Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir, V'rami d'Rabbanan d'Rabbanan. But so here's the problem. We seem to have a contradiction between the positions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Meir. In other words, Rabbi Meir contradicts himself, and the Rabbanan contradict themselves. How so? Here we go, the Sanya. But so we learned in the Bryce, the top of Chav Dalet 24a, first line. Ein isha poda ma'aser sheni below chomesh. An interesting case here. So I'll say, so just to point out before we go on. So according to Rabbi Meir essentially says that once something comes into the hands of the Eved acquires it, and once the Eved acquires it, then what? Master acquires it as well. The Rabbanan the Rabbanan say that there is a case, you could create the framework whereby something comes into the hands of the Eved, yet he doesn't acquire it. Okay, so now watch this. So here we go. Ein isha poda ma'aser sheni below chomesh. So we'll say, so in general, right, a word about ma'aser sheni. Ma'aser sheni we know is the tithe that you have to take from your produce. You actually get to keep it, right? You actually get to consume it. What's the catch? No, not the catch. What's the halacha? You have to bring it to Yerushalayim and go ahead and eat it there. Now I will say, the truth is you could either bring produce or you could also go ahead and redeem produce for money and bring money to Yerushalayim and spend it there on food. In other words, let's say, Baruch Hashem, I have a lot of produce. So I don't want to schlep a lot of produce from, Modi'in to Yerushalayim. So what do? I go ahead and I redeem the Meiser Sheni. I transfer the sanctity onto money, take that money to Yerushalayim, and use that money in Yerushalayim to go ahead and purchase food items. Okay, good. There's another detail. When you redeem your own Meiser Sheni, there is a 1/5 surcharge. 1/5 surcharge, right? That's the halacha. Now, interestingly enough, if someone else redeems your Meiser Sheni for you, that surcharge doesn't exist. That's the halacha. That's not just Xeris HaKasav. So here we go. So, in Isha Pod the Meiser Sheni below Chomesh. In general, a wife, right, the woman, doesn't redeem Meiser Sheni without the 5th. Meaning, well, look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Meiser Sheni shu mistake by baila, shika baila. So we'll say, again, we're assuming what's happening over here. We're talking about that a wife is redeeming her husband's Meiser Sheni, so to speak. Right? And therefore, again, his Meiser Sheni is like her Meiser Sheni. And therefore, if she redeems it, she's going to have to add on the additional 5th. Fine. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says the name of Rabbi Meir. The following: Isha Pod de Meiser Sheni below Chomesh. No, a woman can redeem Meiser Sheni without the additional 5th. Without the additional 5th. Now I will say what Rabbi Meir seems to be saying over here is that halakha l'maisa, it's not considered to be the wife's Meiser Sheni. Fine. So hechi dami. What's the case over here? Ilema bezuzi debal l'meiser debal. So I'll say, if we're talking about that, let's say the wife is redeeming the Meiser Sheni, right? The Meiser Sheni belongs to the husband, and he gave her the money to redeem the Meiser Sheni, then of course there should be the additional 5th. Why? Shluchusei debal ka'avda. Because she's just simply acting in the capacity as an agent for her husband. In other words, if it's husband's Meiser Sheni and husband's money, she's just taking care of the mechanistic details of Meiser Sheni redemption, then of course there should be a 5th. Ve'ela, rather, what do you have to say? Ela, bezuze dida, or Meiser Sheni didei. Rather, I'm mostly talking about a case, ultimately, again, I will say of what? Of she's using her money, and she's redeeming his Meiser Sheni. So her money, his Meiser Sheni. Amrachmana, so the pasuk says, Ish Amrachmana v'lo Isha. It will say, so again, in that case, in general, there's a Xeris HaKasav. When the pasuk talks about adding on the additional 5th, it says, Ish mima'asro. Only a man is obligated to add on this 5th. It's just a Xeris HaKasav, just a pasuk. A woman is not obligated to add on the 5th. So if it's his Meiser Sheni and her money, then of course she's not obligated to add on the 5th. So rather, what's the case? Ela ki hai gavna. Rather, Rabbi say it must be like the following case. Here we go. Da'akni le acher mana. Rabbi say here must be the case. Ruvain is married to Rachel. Shimon comes along, totally unrelated guy, and he says to Rachel, right? Da'akni le acher mana. Shimon comes along and he's makna. He gives over a mana to Rachel, and he says to her, va'amrla, almanas shetifti bo es hameiser. So Shimon comes along, conveys ownership of a mana to Rachel, and he says to Rachel, this is your mana on the condition, or he says, I'm giving you this mana on the condition that you redeem your husband's meiser. So I'll say, so now watch this. This is fascinating. So now, here's the case. Shimon's coming along, says to Rachel, here's a mana on the condition that you use this to redeem your husband's meiser. Now I'll say, now watch this. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, she redeems it without chomesh, without the 5th. The Chachamim say on the other hand, that halacha l'maisa, she has to redeem it with the 5th. So we'll say, what does that tell you? According to Rabbi Meir, a third party could give over a mana to a wife, and her husband will not have ownership in it. That's Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say, as soon as you convey ownership over to the wife, who acquires that mana? Who acquires it? The husband. And we'll say, that's the exact opposite of what we learned before. Right? In the cases of the Eved Kinani, Rabbi Meir said, any time an Eved gets money, what happens? It automatically goes to the master. And there is no ability to convey money to the Eved without the master acquiring it. The Chachamim say, yes, it is possible to convey money to the Eved without the master acquiring. So by Eved Kanani, the Chachamim say an Eved can acquire without his master, right? Rabbi Meir says an Eved can't acquire without his master. By the case of the wife, Rabbi Meir says a wife can acquire without her husband, and the Chum say a wife can't acquire without her husband. So the Shitos contradict each other, because also remember again, we already created this linkage between Eved and wife. Oh, it sounds like a strange statement, right? But we created this linkage because in both cases, there's someone else who owns, so to speak, the hand, right? Who owns that which the hand acquires. So here we have just a contradiction of positions. So the Gemara says, Amra Abaye Eifach. Abaye says it's not a big deal. Just switch the positions over here. And rather say that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Meir is the one who says that a wife can't acquire a money independent of her husband. And the Chachamim say yes, she can. And if you do that, then you align the Shitas over here with the Shitas by Eved Kanani. Rava says, no. The Olam lo seifach. Don't switch anything. V'hacha, both say this case of Meister is a different kind of case. What's the case? B'meister da'asa mi bein nasha askinon. So both say this is actually very interesting. This entire time we thought that we were talking about a case of Meiser Sheni, where the Meiser Sheni belonged to the husband. In fact, that's not the case. The Meiser Sheni doesn't belong to the husband. Where is the Meiser Sheni coming from? The Meiser Sheni is coming from the Rachel's father's home. Right, remember, Reuven's married to Rachel. What's the case? Rachel's father passed away. Let's set up the case as Rachel being the sole inheritor. What does Rachel inherit as part of her father's estate? Father left behind Meiser Sheni. So now Rachel is acquiring Meiser Sheni. So I will say, Rabbi Meir goes according to his reason, because what does Rabbi Meir say? Da'amar Meiser Mammon Hekdishu V'lo Kani Le Baal. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, Meiser Sheni does not belong to an individual. Rather, who does Meiser Sheni belong to? Meiser Sheni is divine property that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to partake of. Now watch this. Because of that, even though normally when a woman inherits property, let's say what happens. Again, this could be such a general case. Right? Reuven's married to Rachel. Rachel's father dies. Rachel is the sole inheritor. What happens to that property that she inherits? What does it become, essentially? It becomes nichsei molog. What's the halacha of nichsei molog? Wife retains title. Husband has usage. Rabbi Meir says Meiser Sheni is not nichsei molog. Why not? Because Meiser Sheni doesn't belong to the individual. Meiser Sheni belongs to the Ribono Shalom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just says, I'm going to allow you to eat it, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. So therefore, when she inherits Meiser Sheni, it doesn't become the property of the husband. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, when she redeems it, there is no additional fifth. I will say, why is there no additional fifth? That's Xeris HaKasav. Because the only person who adds on a fifth is who? A man, ish v'lo isha. Ish v'lo isha. Incredible. V'lo kan lebav, v'rabbanan l'tamai, v'rabbanan hold, amri, mamon head yotu, v'kani lebal. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, hold that no, Meiser Sheni is considered to be mamon head yot. It's considered to be property that a person owns. Therefore, I will say, when Rachel inherits her father's Meiser Sheni, that in fact becomes nichsei molog, which means husband now has rights of usage over it, v'kani lebal, and therefore the husband ultimately does acquire it, and therefore when the wife redeems it, shlichusei de bal ka'avda. Ultimately, again, she's really acting in the capacity of the agent for her husband, and therefore what? She has to add on the additional fifth. So the Gemara says, stop trying to compare the case of Meiser Sheni to the case of Eved Kanani. They're totally different parashas. Good. So I will say, so this ends the discussion in the Mishnah about, or the three-way machlokes, ultimately again about how an Eved Kanani is going to go. Here's what we know, right? Everyone agrees that an Eved Kanani is acquired with kesef, shtar, chazaka. Everyone agrees that an Eved Kanani is emancipated how? Through kesef and shtar. There's going to be a third way we're going to get into now. Then we had the machlokes, ultimately again, how do kesef, how do shtar work? Which turned out to be a three-way machlokes between Rabbi Meir, or the Chachamim, Rabbi Meir, right? The Chachamim, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So we'll say, how do we pass him? Bottom line, how do kesef and shtar work as an emancipatory process for an Eved Kanani? And I will say, along those same lines, remember the two overarching questions I will say are what? Number one, is emancipation a zechus or not? Going back to yesterday's daf, right? Do we say is being emancipated? Is it a zechus or is it a chov? That's overarching question number one. And overarching question number two is, doesn't Eved have the ability to acquire something independent of his master? So we'll say, here we go. So this is in Hilchos Savadim, Perek Hey, Halacha Beis. Here it is. Ketzad Kona Atzlo B'Kesef. How does an Eved acquire himself with money? Right? In other words, how is an Eved emancipated with money? Kigon Shenasan Echad L'Rabo Mos. Like a third party comes along, gives the master money. Va'amar Lo Amanash Sheitzi Avducha Ba'am Lecherus. Kevan Shekibal Araves HaKesef, O Shevei HaKesef, Yatzav L'Cheres. We'll say, so Rambam starts with the simple case. The simple case is where a third party comes to the master and says, listen, here's the money. With this money, your Eved is emancipated. The Adon says, the master says, okay, and that's it. Now we'll say, watch this. Ve'ein tzarich das ha'eved, shezchusi lo, v'zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. So we'll say, here it is. The Rambam paskins that you could redeem an Eved Kinani without his knowledge, without his consent. Why? Because it's considered to be an objective benefit. So I will say, since fast, that's what Rambam paskins. Emancipation, freedom is a zechus, and therefore zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. So a third party could come and redeem the Eved Kinani without his realization. So good. Now we'll say, what about the next case? What about giving money to the Eved to affect his own emancipation? Here we go. V'chein. Im nasan echad le'eved ma'os va'amar al menas sheteitze bahem lecherus im ratza adon lekabel ha'ma'os yatza eved lecherus v'im lo ratza lo kana eved ha'ma'os shelo nasan lo ela al menas sheyeitze bahem lecherus. So I will say, here it is. So halacha l'maisa. Now the Rambam says, can you give an Eved money to affect his own emancipation? You can. But I will say, how do you do it? There's the second formulation. I give the money to Eved and I say, this is the money for you to go free with. The Eved then takes that money to the master. If the master wants to accept it, fantastic, the Eved goes free. If the master doesn't want to accept it, we'll say, what happens? The servant has to give the money back to the owner. No, not to the master, to the owner of the money. We'll say, what do you see from here? So you see from here that halacha l'maisa, ein kinyan le'eved below rabo. An Eved cannot acquire anything without his master. And that's why I will say the only way to give an Eved money is to say, this is the money with which you're going to be emancipated. Like the Rabbanon we saw on the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis, because when you give money that way, the Eved is not acquiring the money. What is the Eved doing? How is he acting? In what capacity? As a courier. He's a courier. So therefore I will say, halacha l'maisa, so the Rambam paskins again, you could do kesef al yedei acherim, so money could be given by others. You could do kesef al yedei atzmo, right? You could give money to the Eved himself, but only with this very particular formulation that doesn't allow the Eved to acquire the money. So therefore, based on the Rambam, we answer our two overarching questions. Number one, so emancipation is considered to be a benefit, and therefore, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that's number one. And number two, ein kinyan le'eved below rabo. Anything the Eved acquires, the master automatically acquires. Therefore, the only way to do kesef through the Eved is with this specifically choreographed way. The Rambam also goes on. He talks about shtar. And I will say again, same idea. Halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, once you establish that emancipation is a zechus, then ultimately you could give a shtar not in the presence of the Eved himself. But interestingly enough, the Rambam also paskins one more piece that you could give a shtar to an Eved. What about the fact that ein kinyan le'eved below rabo? What do you do about the fact that anything an Eved acquires, the master acquires? How does the Rambam reconcile that? Gito v'yado ba'in ka'achos. So I will say simultaneity. So if you put all of this together, the Rambam essentially says you could emancipate your Eved through a shtar, either through giving this document of emancipation to two witnesses, not in the presence of the Eved, because zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, or putting it in the hand of the Eved himself, gito v'yado ba'in ka'achos. And when it comes to kesef, ultimately again the third party could emancipate the Eved, right? Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Or you can give money to the Eved himself, but in this specific way, where the Eved is a courier and not an acquirer. In Perel will say that is the halacha l'maisa. Nu sugya. Now we'll say, now remember, there is another way that an Eved goes free. A third way. There's kesef, there's shtar, and there's what's called roshe evarim. which means if you injure the Eved, specific type of injury, if you injure the Eved, ultimately again, halocha l'maisa, he will go free with that injury. So here we go. So Tana, Yotzei b'shein v'ayin v'rashei varim. So we'll say the halacha is that an Eved goes free if you knock out his eye. Now, by the way, knock out doesn't have to, it could be knock out, but it also means blinds his eye. You blind his eye, or you knock out his tooth, v'rashei varim. Or I will say, or the tips of any of the other extremities. If anything is cut off, ultimately again, the Eved goes free. Again, we're going to go through these 24 extremities, so to speak. We're going to go through them in tomorrow's daf. So I will say, but the only type of injury that an Eved goes free, and remember, I want to point out, this is only an Eved Kinani, not an Eved Ivri. Right? In Eved Ivri, if you injure him, you have to pay damages. But he does not go free based on the injury. This is unique halacha when it comes to Eved Kinani. So Rabbi say, what type of injury? Right, blind his eye, knock out his tooth, or go ahead and injure him in any of the 24 extremities where the injury is irreversible. Right, the injury will not heal. She'enon chozrin. So the Gemara said, Minolan, where do we know this from? Tumya d'shein. Because once remember again, the Torah itself explicitly talks about shein va'ayin. That if you knock out the Eved's eye, or blind his eye, knock out his tooth, he goes free. So how do we learn out the rest? We compare them to shein va'ayin. Mas shein va'ayin mumin sheba galui ve'enon chozrin. Just like injuring the eye or the tooth, Rabbi. Now again, when I say injuring, remember, we're talking about blinding the eye, knocking out the tooth. These are mumin sheba galui. These are ultimately, again, these are visible injuries. Did I just skip a line? I'm sorry. Let me go back. Tana yotzi b'shein va'ayin v'rashei varim shein chozrin. Bishlam shein va'ayin ksivi. So we'll say, I understand shein va'ayin. That's written in the pasuk. It's written in the pasuk. Ela rashei varim minalan. From where do we know that an Eved goes free when he's injured in the other extremities as well? So the Gemara says, Dum minalan dum yidashein va'ayin. Mas shein va'ayin mumin shebegali ve'enon chozrin. Just like shein va'ayin are visible injuries that do not regenerate. So too, if the Eved is injured, right? If the master injures the Eved in any way with a visible injury and an injury that does not regenerate, ultimately again the Eved goes free. So I will say maybe shein va'ayin. Now here's what's interesting. The Torah goes out of this way to tell us that if the master blinds the eye and knocks out the tooth, ultimately, again, the Eved goes free. So the Gemara says, why not just write one, and you can learn out everything from that one? Well, say sometimes when the Torah writes two examples, what's the point of writing two examples? To teach you that it's dafka these two things and nothing else. That's called the concept of shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad ein melamdin. When the Torah gives two examples of something, often it's to say, the principle only applies to these two items and to nothing else. So the Gemara says, no, you need both shein va'ayin. I'll tell you why. Tzricha, dikasev rachmana shein. Had the Torah just said that an Eved Kinani goes free when the master knocks out his tooth, hava aminu afilu amadays shein dechalav. Let's say I would have thought that applies also to a baby tooth. Shein dechalav is a baby tooth. Right? Let's say the master knocks out the Eved's baby tooth, kasev rachmana ayin. Therefore, the Torah says eye. Right? What does eye teach me? Only the type of injury that will not regenerate. Right? You knock out a baby tooth, another tooth will come in. Because of Rahmana Ayin, had the Torah just said Ayin, I havamina, ma ayin shenivra imo, af kol shenivra imo. Just like an eye ultimately again is created with you, right? You're born with an eye. So too again, you only go out free for a type of injury when injury something you were born with. Aval shein lo, but teeth, which you're not born with teeth. Ultimately, I would have thought that if the Adon knocks out a tooth, the Eved doesn't go free. Therefore, tzricha. Therefore, I need both. I need both. That although shein va'ayin ultimately again are kind of lumped together, ultimately again they both teach me different things. So together they teach me a principle that any time the master injures the Eved, a mum shebagalu, in a visible way and a way that does not regenerate, ultimately again the Eved goes. I will say. There's a beautiful idea. The Kiddushin in the Ger Rebbe. The Ger Rebbe quotes this Gemara in a beautiful vart on the Haggadah. He says that by the Rasha, right? We see we have the Arba Banim, the four sons. Right? So the Rasha asks this whole question, Ma'avoda hazos lachem, what are you doing? And what does the Haggadah say? The af ata hake eshinov, which literally means knock out his teeth. And I will say, the truth is, it's perhaps one of the most troubling passages. It is the most troubling passage in the entire Haggadah. Right? From a parenting perspective, it doesn't sound right. Just from a Yiddishkeit perspective, knock out his teeth. The Kiddushin quotes this Gemara Chavdal on the days. The Kiddushin says, what's unique about a tooth? You're not born with it. You're not born with it. It comes later on in life. The Kiddushin says, when you look at the Rasha, what do you have to see? You have to see someone who at their core is good, at their core is beautiful, at their core is holy. Something happened to this person in life. People aren't born Rishayim, but sometimes stuff happens in life that changes people. It changes people. Just like the tooth comes in later on in life and changes the person, so too, this child is not a Rasha. Child is not a Rasha. You got to figure out what is going on with this child. So what do? Haki Ashinov. Haki Ashinov doesn't mean punch him in the mouth. Haki Ashinov means remove the shame, remove this negative stuff that grew, and try to get to the core of this beautiful neshama. Like the Gemara says, Ma shame, right? Ma'ayin shnivri'imo avkol shnivra. Shame lo. Shame. A person is not born with the shame. Person is not born. Haki Ashinov means don't look at the Rasha as a person who's out. Look at the Rasha as a beautiful neshama who is suffering through something in life. Remove the rishos. Look beneath the rishos. Look beneath the negativity, and you'll find someone and something beautiful. Knock out the tooth of negativity, and you will find a tzaddik that's there. Is that not absolutely incredible? I will say, so such an important way to navigate with difficult people, because we all have to deal with difficult people. And sometimes, again, when we encounter difficult people, it's easy just to write them off as difficult, negative, bad people. The truth is, again, a Yid, a Jew, is always beautiful, is always Kaddish, is always holy. Sometimes in life, the tooth of negativity grows in. So you have to know how to knock that out. You have to learn how to look beyond that and be able to see the true beauty of people for who they are. Incredible. The Ema, Kiyake Klau. So we'll say, so now the Gemara is trying to figure this out. Why don't we say it? We'll say now, remember, the pasuk that we're talking about is, Kiyake ish es ein avdo es ein amaso, v'shichasa, l'chav shishachenu tachas eino. Torah says, if you knock out the eye of your servant or the eye of your maidservant, right, and you destroy it, ultimately they go free. So why don't you say the following? Kiyake klau. The phrase kiyake, right, if you hit it, right, that's a klau, a general statement. Shein va'ayin, prat. Ultimately, shein and ayin is a specific. So we'll say, what do you have over here? Klal prat. I have a klal and a prat. So the Gemara says, ein bechlal el mashprat. So we'll say, general, when you have a klal and a prat, how does that work? The klal, right, is defined by the prat. Why don't we say shein va'ayin in midyachrin elav? Maybe the pasuk is just maybe it's almost like klal prat would say the only thing an eved goes free for is shein and ayin, but nothing else. To which the Gemara says l'chav shiyishachenu chazer v'kalal. No, there's another phrase. Sent him free. That's another klal. So I'll say, what do I have over here? I have a klal uprat uklal via tadan elakei prat. So we'll say in general, when you have a klal uprat uklal, ultimately, again, the prat comes to give you the details of the klal. How so? Ma prat mufurash mum shebegali ve'enam chozrim. Just like the prat, the specific over shein va'ayin, are injuries that are visible and do not regenerate. Af kol mum shebegali ve'enam chozrim. So to Rabbi say, what type of injuries allow for emancipation? The type of injuries which are visible and do not regenerate. Incredible. So we'll say, maybe I should say that just like the prat, shein va'ayin is unique in that what? Number one, it is visible and it doesn't work. Batam malachto means, right, a tooth that's knocked out doesn't work as a tooth. An eye that is blinded doesn't work as an eye. Ve'eno chozer, and ultimately it doesn't regenerate. In other words, maybe there's three criteria. Number one, visible injury. Number two, the limb injured or the part of the body injured can no longer perform its designed function. And number three, it doesn't regenerate. So Rabbi say, based on that, what I would say is maybe the only type of injury for which an Eved is emancipated is an injury that satisfies these three criteria. Number one, visible. Number two, the part of the body no longer works, doesn't do its design function. And number three, doesn't regenerate. But if that's the case, Allah Mataya was an interesting case. What about the following brayso? Talash bizikano v'dildul bo etzem. So I'll say, what happens if you have an Eved Kanani and he has a beard? He's a beard. And what do? You yank on the Eved's beard. Now, as a result of that, you dislocate some bone in the jaw. And I will say, Talash bezikano v'dildul bo etzem. Now, by the way, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says it's actually on the top over here, the last wide line. You dislocated the bone, right? You dislocated the bone from and apparently that's type of injury that's not going to get fixed. So what's talacha? Eved yotzei bahem lecherus. The Eved goes free. And I will say, now, what's interesting is as follows. Apparently, the injury they're describing over here, right, is a non-critical injury. In other words, the person continues to function, but the injury itself is a type of injury that ultimately, again, doesn't regenerate. It doesn't regenerate. And I will say, now, what's missing over here? What's missing over here is bittul malachto, right? There's no, so to speak, nothing stopped functioning for its design purpose. So this type of injury satisfies two of the criteria. Number one, it's visible, right? And number two, it doesn't regenerate. But yet, if there's a third criteria, batal malachto, right? In other words, something stops functioning from its design purpose, that criteria is not satisfied over here, yet the Eved still goes free. To which the Gemara says, it's not a problem. L'chav shi yishalchenu ribuyahu. I will say the phrase of l'chav shi yishalchenu ultimately again, that is a ribui, and that comes to include other injuries as well. V'iri buyahu, if that's the case, that l'chav shi yishalchenu ultimately again is a ribui, then afilu he kol ayado v'tzimsa v'sofa lachzor nami. We'll say, what about the following case? Halacha l'maisa, I have an Eved Kanani, I break his arm. So I will say, so here's a good example. So there's a visible injury, right? Even though it's going to regenerate, but we should say the chavshi yishalchenu ultimately should allow him to go free because of that. Allah Tanya, yet we learned he kol ayado v'tzimsa v'sofa lachzor ein Eved yotzei balacherus. We'll say if you break the Eved's arm and it's going to heal, he does not go free. So I will say that's obvious. Why imkain shein va'ayin maya hanile? Because I will say what do shein va'ayin come to teach us? Shein va'ayin come to teach us that the only injuries that an Eved goes free for is what? Type of injuries that will not regenerate. So we'll say, so it turns out when we kind of distill all of this just into one line, we have now our criteria. What's the criteria for the types of injuries for which an Eved goes free? Essentially, mum shebegalui, a visible injury, ve'eno chozer, and it doesn't regenerate. That's the criteria. If you injure your Eved in a way that satisfies that criteria, then halacha l'maisa, the Eved goes free. Incredible. Now, I will say, right, so it seems to be that we kind of like drop off the batal melachto idea, that the injury, right, the part of the body injured cannot perform its designed function. Because it seems to be implicit in the fact that it's no longer going to regenerate. But we'll come back to that. But right now, those are the two criteria. Mum shebegaloi, visible injury, ve'eno chozer, doesn't regenerate. Here we go. Tana abanam. Bekulam eved yotzei bahem lecherus, v'tzarich get shichra. Shabbos say, this is another interesting question now. Shabbos say, Bekulan means, and remember, here's what's interesting. We're kind of operating off this list that exists, right? This list of all the 24 parts of the body that if they're injured, the Eved goes free, even though we haven't seen that list yet. Right? We'll see the list in tomorrow's daf. But let me say, there's this list. So Bekulan, if an Eved is injured in any of the ways mentioned in the list, Yotzei Bahem Lecherus, he goes free. B'tzarich get shichrer to Rabbi Shimon. I will say this is fascinating. Rabbi Shimon says even though, right, an injury, and part of the body, right, that is visible and does not regenerate, will ultimately allow you to go free. You still need to get shichrer. Fascinating, right? You still need a document of emancipation. Rabbi Meir says no, you don't. No, you don't. In other words, once you're injured in this way, it's automatic emancipation, and you do not need a get shichra. Fine. So Rabbi Lozer Omer Tzarech. Rabbi Lozer says yes, you do. You need to get shichra. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Einos. Rabbi Tarfon says no, you don't. Rabbi Akiva Omer Tzarech. Rabbi Akiva says ultimately you need to get shichra. So we'll say so. Fundamental machlokes. When an eved is injured in one of these ways, which automatically triggers emancipation, does he still need to get shichra or not? Subject of machlokes. Hamachriyim lifnei chachamim omrim. Those of us who are trying to reach a conclusion in front of the chachamim said, Nirin divrei Rabbi Tarfon b'shein v'ayin shatorah zachsalo v'divrei Rabbi Akiva b'shar ivarim hoil uknas chachamim. Fascinating, both sides. So they wanted to reach like a compromise position. It seems to be Rabbi Tarfon is in the same camp, ultimately again of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Tarfon says, when do we hold the Rabbi Tarfon? When don't you need to get shichur? When don't you need to get shichur? When? For shein and ayin. So if I injured my eved by blinding his eye, knocking out his tooth, where the Torah speaks about those specific cases, so that's the case where he goes free, and what? No get shichur. Because those are biblically specific cases. But in all of the other cases, Rabbi say, all the other cases, ultimately, which the Gemara calls knas chachamim, are considered to be cases where the rabbis created that case. It's a rabbinic penalty. In that situation, you will need to get shechur. So the Gemara says, knasu, the other parts of the body that an eved goes free for is a knas, as a rabbinic penalty. The Gemara says, krayu darshin. Rabbi say, we just darshan psukim. Or we just did this, right? We just talked about this. We learn out all of the injuries from shein v'ayin, right? We're darshaning klal uprat uklal. Remember, I will say, when you employ an exegetical method to learn something, that endows it with the status of a daraisa. So what are you talking about? That the other parts of the body that an eved gets injured with is a knas rabbanon. It's not a knas rabbanon. It's klal uprat uklal. It's a drasha that makes it a daraisa. To which the Gemara says, Knasu, Krai Dashinan, Ella, Hoyel Umidrash Chachamimu. So I'll say, you're right, but let's acknowledge that there's a difference between something that is explicitly written in the Pasuk versus something that is darshaned out through an exegetical method. Okay? They might both even be daraisas, but there's a difference between them. So perhaps, if the master knocks out the shein v'ayin, so in that case, the eved goes free and there's no need for a get shechur. But for other types of injuries, although an eved will go free, perhaps there is a need for a get shechur. So the Gemara says, so my time with Reb Shimon. So we'll say, what's Reb Shimon's logic? That even when you injure an eved, you still require a get shechur. He says, Yoliv shiluach mi'isha. So we'll say, he makes exer shava of shiluach from a wife. It says shiluach by abadim, and it says ultimately again shiluach. L'chavshi yishalchenu. Right? It's used lashon of shiluach by eved, a lashon of shiluach by isha. And we say ma isha b'shtar, af eved nami b'shtar. So I will say ultimately again, Rabbi Meir will say, Rabbi Shimon will say, just like it says shiluach by a wife, it says shiluach by an eved kinani. Just like the only way for a wife to leave a marriage, independent of her death of her husband, is through a get. So too, the only way an eved leaves avdos is through a get, even with the injuries. Ultimately, he still needs to get shechur. For Rabbi Meir would say, "Iksiv chavshi lebasov kidika amrit." Rabbi Meir would say, if at the end of the day, if it would have said chavshi, he goes free at the end of the pasuk, I would have agreed with you that you still require a get shechur. Hashda dichsiv lechavshi yishalchenu. Now that it says lechavshi, you shall send him away, that teaches me havele chavshi meikara. They both say that teaches me that at the time that he goes free, he is already a free man. Which means what? That from the moment the master injures him, at that very moment, I will say, what's the halacha? He's free. He's free. So it's a machlokes how to darshan the pasuk. So again, Rabbi Shimon is making his gzer shava of shiluach from avadim to isha. Just like an isha requires a get, so too an eved requires a get. Chachamim will say, sorry, not Chachamim. Rabbi Meir will say, l'chavshi yishalchenu means by the time you're sending him away, he's what? He's already free. Which means what? He becomes free the moment that he's injured. Okay, so we'll say it's a fundamental machlokes. Here we go. Hiko al eno b'sama al ozna b'charsha eved yosef al lechedus. So we'll say halacha is if you hit the eved in the eye and you blind his eye, right? Or right? Or you went ahead and you made him deaf in his ear. Ultimately, again, he goes free. He goes free. So you blind his eye, make him deaf in one ear. Ultimately, again, he goes free. Now, here's an interesting case. Nagar eino ve'eino ro'ah, right? So I'm sorry. Everybody knows zechus. Nagar eino ve'eino ro'ah, kineged azno ve'eino shomea, ein eved yotze bahem lecheros. So we'll say, now what are these cases? What are these cases? So this is interesting. Look at Rashi. Kineged eino, Rashi says, shehika b'kosa v'visa b'kol ve'eino ro'ah onis chayish. I will say, so now, if I go ahead and I hit the Eved in the eye and I blind him, or I hit the Eved in the ear and I make him deaf, ultimately, again, he goes free. What happens if halacha l'maisa, I bang on the wall, I make a very loud noise, right, opposite the Eved, and as a result of the fright from the noise, he goes blind. Or as a result from the fright of the noise, right, of the noise itself, he goes deaf. What's the halacha? Ein Eved yotze bahem lecherus. Ultimately, again, the Eved does not go free. Does not go free. Now, both say, now, what's the interesting? So, what's he interesting? Case number one, I'm hitting the Eved in the eye, hitting the Eved in the ear, causing damage. He goes free. Case number two is I'm creating a loud noise in proximity of the Eved, which results in his blindness, which results in his deafness, but yet he doesn't go free in that case. So, Rav Shmuel Silber, remember the kolel of klumu? Are you trying to tell me then that making noise which causes damage, ultimately again is halachically insignificant? But what we learned, Tarnagol shahoshit rosha la'aver klei zechus v'takabal v'shavra mishad nezek shalom. We'll say if I have a rooster, right, and my rooster walks over to your kli, to your glass utensil, and sticks his head in your glass utensil and crows. The rooster crows, right? Crows and makes enough noise, and as a result of the noise, it cracks your glass utensil. I'm chayiv. I have to pay for that damage. Now, we'll say, we're not going to get into over here, nezek shalom. This is a whole discussion of machlokes in the Rabbanan and Sumchos about sroros. Sroros, the secondary damage. Pay full damages or partial damages. That's not important for us for now. It's important, but not for us right now. The point over here is, what do you see from here? That noise that creates damage is still considered to be damage. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Rav, sus shetzanaf, v'chamar shenar v'shavru kelim. So again, if a horse brays, or a donkey, a horse neighs, and a donkey brays, right? And as a result of the noise, ultimately again, it smashes some utensils. You pay Now, both say, the point of it is, what do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa, if you damage through noise, ultimately again, you're chayiv for that. So if that's the case, if I go over to my Eved, and I make a very loud noise outside of the Eved, and as a result of that loud noise, ultimately he goes blind or he goes deaf, I should be chayiv. In other words, when I say chayiv, he should go free because of that. They will say, get ready for this. Amrlei, this is incredible. Shiny Adam, the Chaven de Bardasu, Ihu Mavis Nafshe. They will say, people are different than animals. Why? Because since a person has das, it is the person who allows himself to become frightened. It is a person who allows himself to become frightened. In other words, they will say, when I go over to the Eved and I hit him in the ear, or I hit him on the eye, I'm directly causing the damage. When I make loud noise outside of the Eved, and as a result of that, he becomes frightened, and as a result of that fright, he goes blind, or ultimately, again, he goes deaf, that is the Eved allowing himself to be impacted by external stimuli. And therefore, again, it's not me who's damaging him, but it's the Eved allowing himself to be impacted by that which is happening around him. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Shiny Adam debar dasu, a person has das, and therefore, high nizak, v'chimivas midaite kamivas. When the Eved ultimately, again, when the Eved goes ahead and becomes frightened, he's allowing himself to become frightened. Shenosin libo el pachad kol haba pitom. He is literally directing his mind, ultimately, again, to the fright. So we'll say, this is absolutely incredible. So the Gemara says, when you hit him, right, you hit him in the eye, you hit him in the ear, that's you causing the damage. When you create a loud noise outside of him, I will say, you're creating stimuli. But a person is a bardas, and it is up to him to decide how to absorb that external stimuli. The fact that the Eved allows himself to absorb it in a way that causes him to go deaf or causes him to go blind, that's the Eved, so to speak, allowing that to occur. The person who did it is not responsible. I will say, what a ridiculously, overwhelmingly amazing Musar Haskell. I will say, every day in life, there are things that happen outside of us. We have a decision as to how we allow external stimuli to impact us. You see, often we allow ourselves to be the victims of other people's behaviors. As if what other people do, there's no choice but to allow external stimuli to impact me. It's not true, I will say. It's not true. When something happens outside of me, someone says something, someone does something, something happens in life, I make the choice to how that impacts me. I make the choice. Do I allow that loud noise into my life? Do I allow that loud noise into my neshama? The things that happen around me could only impact me to the degree that I allow them to. If I don't allow something in, it will not impact me. V'haraya, the loud noise made outside of the Eved is not considered to be damage done by the master. Why? Because it is the Eved who made the conscious decision to allow him to be frightened, to allow himself to be frightened. I'll say, as we go through life, things happen each and every day. Before you allow something to upset you, to anger you, to impact you, pause for a moment and say, am I willing to let this influence into my life? Or am I willing to say, I am in control of me. I choose what comes in. I choose what enters. And I know that if I let this in, it's going to have detrimental effects upon me, upon who I am, about what I want to accomplish. We control how the external stimuli of life impact us. So we'll have to stop over here for today. Tremendous shkoyach. Pick up tomorrow. What a daf. What a daf. Shkoyach. All right. Chavra and Zoom, have a great day, everyone.